Good evening, everyone. I am going to start off my very first recording of the new year the way I ordinarily finished my recordings last year. And that is to say, I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank you for watching. Now, what I won't say is, I want to thank you for agreeing, because I don't expect you're going to agree with me. In fact, I'm not going to even ask you to agree with me. Now, a lot of my recordings have been in part to persuade you to see things as I do. But that really hasn't always been the main goal. I have just been interested in sharing my point of view with you. And the one I'm going to share with you tonight is very controversial, and it's something that a lot of us will probably feel very emotionally about. I want to take the emotion out of it and approach it in a very common sense, strictly fact-based way. But I want to start off by saying that one thing that we had talked about recently, or that I had shared with you, was that midterm elections were coming up. And one thing that I did not talk about was one of the many amendments to the Florida Constitution, I believe, that I was going to be voting on. And one of those was to allow for those who have been convicted of felonies, who have served their time, to allow them to vote. Now, that isn't being extended, and let's just say that that was passed. I voted yes, and Florida voted yes. It is going to be now law. You serve your time, you get out, and your voting rights are restored. It used to be where you had to, go to Tallahassee, the state capital, and actually sit before a board, and you had to petition the government to try to get your voting rights restored. And there is a legal method in this country, or a legal concept called double jeopardy. And how it works, to my understanding, at least in part, is that once you're tried for something, you can't be tried for that same thing again. So if you commit a crime and you're acquitted, you're off scot-free. Unfortunately, that's how our judicial system works. Some countries it's different. They can continue trying you, like in Italy. But here, once you are either set free or sentenced, you're either set free forever or you serve your sentence and then you're done. But here in Florida, you can do time and get out, and then you're still being punished because you're not able to vote. Okay? And you're still out there in the community working and being taxed. And that's taxation without representation. That's not right. You should have the right to play a role in, your government. So anyway, this rule, however, is not being extended to those who have been convicted of a sexual offense. Okay? I don't understand why. I understand if, I think it also doesn't apply to people who have been convicted of murder. Well, people that have been convicted of murder, I don't even know why they would be set free, But if you are set free, the least of society's worries should be whether you have one vote or not. They really should be worried about whether you will reoffend. But sex offenders, okay, I know what they do, and I'm not trying to make light of that, but there's more to their life, and they're affected by government, and I still think that they should have a say in government. Not a lot of people are sex offenders, and I really don't think that they have any special interests that will sway an election if they're allowed to vote. So, you know, we probably think of them as the lowest in society, and they should be grateful they're out in public at all. But I have seen how these charges affect people firsthand. I'm not saying I've ever been charged with any type of sexual offense, and I never will be. But it ruins people's lives. I mean, you have to become a registered sex offender. You can only live in certain communities that are not near parks or schools or any of that, and it just makes it very, very difficult. And I think when you make people's lives hell, they're more likely to engage in addictive, destructive behavior. Okay, so these people that commit these sexual offenses should be charged and convicted and serve their time. And once they've set their, once they've served their their time for the crime, set them free. Okay, no strings attached. If they reoffend, back in prison they go. If there's any suspicion that they may reoffend, don't let them out. Okay, but making these silly little rules about where they can live, I mean, these people have a car, they drive. They can walk to the nearest school, they can walk to the nearest park, you can continue putting them farther and farther away, but it's not going to keep them from reoffending. And now let's get into the really nitty-gritty about these whole sex crimes thing, because it seems to be a huge issue in this country, I believe, more so than anywhere else. Okay? And I've talked about some of my experiences, how I've been affected by these sex offenders. When I was a young boy, a man exposed himself in front of me. That is all that I remember. And I remember being disgusted and politely just walking away from him. I believe... my recollection is that he did fondle himself. He was perusing through pornographic magazines, and I think he invited me to also participate as, touching myself, or maybe even touching, I don't know. That's all I remember. But I'm not scarred for life. I did tell my mother about it, and we avoided that person. It was as simple as that back in those days. Now, I got lucky in that it wasn't any worse than that, because, I was a young kid, and that could have psychologically damaged me for life. I don't know, because it didn't happen. A little later on, around that time, there was a boy my age who used to, pull down the back of my pants, and it bothered me because I was embarrassed by it. But I was also strangely curious about, him and myself. I was becoming a little bit more sexually aware, and it wasn't until I was 17 that I had my first experience. But when I was 14, I was just desperate for something to happen. That's a boy's hormones at 14. They affect boys the same way, whether they're interested in the same sex or in the opposite sex. They are desperate to have an opportunity to be with someone. And at that age, I didn't care who I was with. I just wanted to be with somebody. And I had to wait until 17. And then it happened when I was 17. And yes, I was a minor. And here I am now, an adult, many years later, and I still have no regrets over what happened when I was 17 years old. And I was with someone that wasn't also a minor. Um, he was 32 years old. So he said, I think we all remember our first experience. We all remember who the other person was. I can remember him vividly, what he looked like. And now as an adult, I look back and I'm like, man, he wasn't even 32 years old. This guy had to have been in his 50s. All right. And what really appalled me at the time is, as a 17-year-old, I already felt like an adult. I wanted to be an adult. I wanted what I was doing to be legit. And he was a pedophile. I mean, he made no bones about it. He was interested in people at the most my age, and certainly a lot younger. And, when something happens to your child, I don't know what it's like to be a parent, because I don't have any children of my own. All I can do is look back on my childhood and, recognize that, yes, I did have something that happened to me in my early childhood that shouldn't have happened. And then later on, still as a minor, but older at a time when I wanted to experience sex. And I have no regrets I have regrets about what happened as a child, but what happened when I was 17 years old, I have no regrets about that. And I think even all of us who have become adults, we look back to when we were teenagers and the things that we did behind our parents' backs, that would have driven our parents crazy. And yet we survived, and we've started our own families. So I don't understand why there is so much hysteria about protecting the children. Yes, we need to, protect them to the extent that we need to tell them, what to look out for, because there's a lot of sexually transmitted diseases, but we got to protect them and let them know what can happen, and encourage them to do the right thing. But a lot of them are not going to listen. Obviously I didn't listen. I was probably told things, and I don't even remember what my parents told me, but I'm sure they told me don't go hook up with some, old person, or hook up, period, and I did it anyway. And here I am today. I survived. I'm fine. So I think too big a deal is made about this. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm not saying that anyone should be pursuing people 12 years of age and younger. But if teenagers are having sex, I just don't see what the big deal is. If someone over 18 is having sex with somebody that's 16 or 17 years old, I still don't see the big deal. That might bother you, but, don't let it bother you that I feel this way, okay? Because I'm just one voice. I'm not advocating any kind of change. I'm saying follow the laws, abstain from any behavior that's going to get yourself into trouble. But it's just ridiculous how extreme it has become. I've heard of stories where somebody was drunk, another person who also was drunk, or maybe not even drunk, may have done something to that person. They woke up the next day, they called the police, the other person got arrested. And maybe in that case, it's okay, because there has to be consent. And I think minors can consent, but they have to be at the age where they know what sex is and they have a desire for it. But when you're like 12 years of age and younger, you're still thinking, ick towards the opposite sex, assuming you're heterosexual. So something to happen to you at that age, you can't process that or understand it. So it shouldn't happen there, and there should definitely be strict strict laws about that. Touching someone 12 years of age and younger should certainly be a crime, but, teenagers, a lot of teenagers lie. And I think back to when I was 17 years old, that man knew I was a minor. But if he, and I don't lie to people, so I'm not going to say that I would have lied to him, but there are people, there are young people, there are minors who will lie. I've seen it happen. You know, they go on these hookup apps. You have to be 18 years of age or older. All right, they go on them, they represent themselves as being 18 and over, and I mean, demanding a photo ID of somebody that looks kind of young is certainly not very exciting at that very moment, and people usually want to kind of be on the down low and not be exchanging photo IDs. But you know, you should be able to meet people on these apps and expect that they are adults, but sometimes they're not, and yet you still will go to prison. And I think if these minors are lying to adults, the adults shouldn't be held culpable. I just don't. I've seen lives ruined. It's not right. So anyway, I can go on and on and on about this all night long. I hope I didn't upset you too much about it. Like I said, it's just my opinion. I'm just saying that I don't understand it. I'm just saying that I think we shouldn't be this uptight about it. But I'm okay with it. All right, just ranting. So again, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you listening, and I hope we can do it again real soon. Good night. I was thinking about these videos while stopped in traffic today, and thought to myself that rather than endless rants, I could stand to think positive for a change. I tested the idea when all of a sudden I found myself in a spine-crushing accident, and the next thing to enter my mind, aside from scrap metal, was that having been crippled, I would forever be able to find parking spaces anywhere up front in the handicap spaces.